which has a fairly global footprint. And the name of the company itself may not be very familiar to a lot of people. However, the brands that this company represents are extremely popular, very well entrenched brands in consumer life and consumer journeys. Some of the biggest brands that the company sells are Mentos, Chupa Chups, Frutella, Vivident, Big Bubble, to name a few. These are obviously the ones which are very global in their footprint. But then the company also represents a lot of smaller regional brands, Alpenliebe being one of them, which is one of the major brands in India, China, and some other parts of the world. Similarly, some of the gums like Benegum, the multivitamin gummies and stuff like that, which are more popular in the Western Europe and US. In the US also, one of the very big brands is called Airheads, which is one of a very iconic large brand in the North American market. So this is in a nutshell a little bit of a portfolio. Primarily, the company manufactures, sells, and distributes and markets brands within the sugar, confectionery, and the gum market. However, the company also is involved in some of the chocolate products in few regions of the world. So this is primarily what the company is all about. The company operates in almost 160 countries, has its manufacturing footprint in about 35 of them, and then employs, more than, I believe, 70,000 people across the world. Yeah. I don't know if that is sufficient, or would you want me to go into a little bit more detail?
No, I think for now, I think this should be okay just to start off with. And as we go down, we'll talk about your products that you sell across the globe and the localized products. I think that will be a good understanding to have in terms of consumer behavior. And now maybe the later part of my question, why did you, after having such a huge and such an impressive portfolio, why Perfetti?
Listen, it's a journey in, I believe, anybody's life. From the very beginning, since I graduated from my business school back in 1992, I've been involved in very, very large corporate setups, including Coca-Cola, Nestle. And then having spent close to 20 years in very large organizations, very big organizations, I decided to sort of take a little bit of a break from the corporate journey. Before I took a break, let me correct myself. I also took up a role as the CEO of Engro Foods in Pakistan. So returning back to Pakistan after 21 years. So yeah, I mean, and then I decided to take a little bit of a break for a couple of years away from the corporate world. So I did some private consultancy with some multilateral organizations, some private sector organizations, which in itself was nice. It was a good breather, gave me some time to reflect as well. And then, wasn't action enough for me. So I decided to step back into the corporate sector. But this time I sort of decided to step back from large corporate setups to somewhere which is more entrepreneurial, big enough that I could, apply what I've learned, but small enough to really matter. Right. So I was looking for a role which gives me a lot more independence, a lot more, I would say, self-expression than the large corporates with very large organizations and multiple hierarchical matrices to deal with. So hence, to answer your question, why Perfetti? I think this was basically the reason why I decided to join this group, and to be very honest, a group that pays pretty well as well. So, best of both worlds.
That's
So
and
this is the answer to your question, basically.
it does, but in itself, Perfetti is one of the largest confectionery producers in the world, from what I understand from the website. So in that way, it might not be such a diversification from the large names that you have on your resume already.
Yeah, I think one of the bigger factors is being a large listed corporate setup to a private company, which is more privately run, privately managed, not having to deal with quarterly forecasts and analyst reports and advices and stuff like that. So it gives you a little bit more, I would say, independence to work on a more longer term sustainable business model, consumer model, product development model, innovation, creativity, everything that you can think of. So you're not really too much consumed with the short-term results and then having at the same time looking at a longer-term picture. So I think again, as I said, was large enough. Perfetti was large enough for me to be satisfied with what I do, but small enough for me to have that independence and entrepreneurial spirit, I must say.
Okay, we'll link this question towards what you've told us now towards the end when we talk about skill set requirement and what to look for in a job when we go lower down. So let's talk about some of your best-selling products. You say that Chupa Chup and Alpenliebe, and which one is Mentos? They are three.
Mentos, yeah.
They are one of the three of your most selling products.
Correct.
What is in it that ticks with the customer? These three products.
I think one word that ties all three brands quite well is the heritage. All these brands are more than 60, 70 years old. We just celebrated the 70th year birthday of Chupa Chups last year. Mentos itself is over a 50 years old brand. And then in addition to that, Chupa Chups also is 70 years old. Alpenliebe not as old as some of these other brands. But then Frutella, which is also one of the very large brands the company has, is over 60 years old as well. So I think one common element across all brands is a long heritage, a consumer following which has grown up with these brands, has transcended over a couple of generations, if not more, and has survived the test of times in terms of its legacy, its development, evolution, innovation, consumer interest, and availability, I must say, across the world as well. So I think these brands have really evolved over the years and have become a very favorite immediate indulgence for consumers that they're loved by.
In these confectionery brands, do consumers ever get to know about the parent company, or do you think it's the brand name that sells?
I think the company is more focused on brand names itself. The corporate name itself, I would say, is more of a recent phenomena that the company has started investing in, primarily to attract more, I would say, seasoned talent. And being a private company for the longest time, the company was run more closely as a family business. But now, obviously, with the footprint that it has, now requires a more fresher talent, and hence the need for a corporate employer brand identity as well. So the company name itself is not as visible as out there as the brands they are that it represents. But yeah, I think both of them are more important. Yeah.
So do you work on a recipe copyright or licensing? Why other brands haven't been able to copy these kings of Perfetti?
Listen, it all boils down to the product intrinsics, the brand intrinsics, and the passion for innovation. I think over the years, the company has done a fantastic job of of carrying the legacy and heritage of these brands forward, but at the same time being extremely relevant and fresh for the consumers across the ages. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why the brands have sustained for as long as they have. It doesn't mean that similar brands or similar products don't exist in the market. They do, across the globe. But having said that, it's the brand which transcends the generation as well.
So you're connecting to this, even your website talks a lot about innovation in production processes, innovation in packaging. I think the Mentos, the shape of Mentos in itself is probably one of the things that the company hugely talks about. So when you think of that, and with so much innovation going on in your company and a lot of R&D that Perfetti invests in, are you would the company majorly call itself more product driven or customer driven?
Listen, it all starts with the consumer, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the whole process revolves around the consumer. So all brand development, product development, process development revolves around what the consumer is looking for. Yeah, what tickles the consumer senses, determines what goes into the product, into the packaging, into the process, into the marketing activity, everything, right? So it all revolves around the consumer and what the consumer wants at that particular point in time. And hence the brand, in order to stay fresh in consumers' minds, stay relevant in consumers' journey of enjoyment and pleasure, the brand has to deliver against what the consumer is looking for. You mentioned shapes. Yes, the shapes play a big role. These are part of the brand intrinsics, or as Martin Lindstorm would call it in his book called Biology, these are the smashables that the brands have, right? So these iconic images, shapes, colors, sounds around the brand are all the relevant measures or KPIs that the consumer looks for in a brand that they love through their journey.
So what happens with the new product development in Perfetti? And if you're doing new product development or exploring new recipes, or even within a brand, for example, you were talking about maybe Chupa Chup having many flavors, and so do others of your products. Do you do consumer-based research in coming up with new varieties, or is it more recipe-driven?
No, again, as I said, it all starts with the consumer,
Okay.
right? So whether it's flavor, whether it's shapes, size, the way it's presented, the way it's delivered to the consumer, it all starts with the consumer. So all the research is basically about consumer needs, trends, behaviors, attitudes towards the brand and towards the product itself. That goes into then the development and extension of any product. So you mentioned several flavors of Chupa Chups. So yeah, Chupa Chups has intrinsically, I think across the world, has more than 200 flavors. Yeah, so, but then it doesn't mean that all 200 flavors are available in each market. Okay. Yeah, so it really depends on what are the trends, the behaviors, the likeness of those flavors in each particular market. I will give you an example of a brand called Alpenliebe, which is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's very a popular brand in South Asia, and also in Southeast Asia, China. And the brand stands for its caramel candy, a hard-boiled caramel candy. But at the same time, the biggest variant of the brand in Bangladesh is tamarind. And similarly, a very big part of Alpenliebe brand in China is the lotus fruit. So again, it really depends on where the consumers are. What are the consumers looking for? Similarly, you mentioned Chupa Chups. One of the very big flavor in India of Chupa Chups is a green mango filled lollipop. So again, a very traditional spicy flavor, which does extremely well in India. right? Similarly, in Western Europe, it's more of a base products like strawberry and cherry and sour pops and green apple and all that stuff. So it really depends on what the consumer is looking for.
Okay, so if we look at some information that I got off your website is that your majority of your markets are within Europe and Asia. I think around 35 to 37% of your sales are in these regions. Other than flavors, is there any other consumer behavior which is very marketably different between the two? Between Europe
Absolutely.
and Asia?
Absolutely. In South Asia and Southeast Asia, a lot of, I would say, consumer trends are buying singles for immediate consumptions. So you will see a lot of these markets, and also also depends on how the trade is structured, right? So India has over 6 million small outlets where our products are sold. And all these 6 million outlets don't necessarily carry more than 2 or 3 product assortments in total. And all of these products are sold by single mono pieces. Similarly, in China, a mono piece sale is a very large chunk of a market, and so it is in Indonesia, where 80% of the business is in mono pieces. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Western Europe, it's more of a purchase for later consumption. So you see a lot of sales of multi-pack products, or a bag of multiple products which are consumed later on, or maybe even consumed on the go, but then the consumer is more towards buying a bigger bag. Similarly, in North America, that's the same behavior. So each product portfolio and market is really dependent on what the consumer is looking for, where they're shopping, and how the trade is structured in order to deliver these products to the consumers.
And if you look at the demographics in any of these regions of the world, do you see what kind of age groups do you see consuming your product? I believe now it's not limited to the very young. As far as I see people consuming the product. So what kind of age groups, or is there a gender preference in the confectionery market in terms of preferences?
Listen, conventionally speaking, sugar confectionery is related to very young population, very younger consumer segment. However, I think the brands actually carry it through a consumer journey for a very long period of time. Confectionery items or candies are very small, indulgent, I would say pleasurable products. Yeah. And I don't know if you've seen any of the Chupa Chups communication lately in the last 3 or 4 years, where the main big idea behind the marketing is forever fun. And there you see a consumer being transported by the product into their early teens or even preteen times as to how they used to have fun with those products, and that fun still, transports them back into that age. So a lot of these products are actually present in consumer journey for a very long period of time. Similarly, some of the products actually transport or transform themselves along the age of the consumer journey as well. A case in point could be a Mentos candy, where a consumer might be consuming a simple mint or a fruit flavor of Mentos in their early teen life. And then as they grow a little bit older, where freshness becomes a more prevalent need of their consumption, then they transform themselves into consuming a Mentos chewing gum, and then from chewing gum into mints when they're consuming coffee or having a cigarette, and then they consume a mint for the breath freshness. So a lot of times these brands also transform themselves to carry themselves with the consumer journey as they go along as well. Similarly, there are products like a Big Bubble, a bubble gum, which is very, very preteen, a very young child product, which again is very much related to fun, how the consumers have their fun by blowing bubbles and having fun with the flavors and everything like that. So so yeah, I mean, I think each brand is relevant to its own consumer journey as they go along in the consumption or pleasure moments.
I think one of the Chupa Chup ads that I recently saw is exactly talking about that. They're playing a game of hide and seek. I think preteens and teens with their younger siblings. And all of them seem to be enjoying a Chupa Chup on the way. So I think that's a great insight that you put in most of your adverts. For these advertisements, the way we once looked at, I think one of the Mentos ad together also, where little children were interviewing were trying to bridge the gaps between older sitting together. What kind of research do you do to get through to such minute consumer details that come out so well in your advertisements?
That's a very good question, Saima. Listen, we deploy several tools to gain that insight with the consumer. Some of those tools could be pure and simple syndicated research at point of sales. What the consumers are buying, what age group is buying, are the consumers buying it directly, or is there an intermediary like a mom buying for their children? Where are they buying it from? Which regions? What are the trends? What do they prefer? What flavors? So a lot of syndicated research is primarily a shopper-driven insight. At the same time, we also conduct a lot of consumer household panel data as well as to what kind of households are buying what kind of products. So that gives us an insight as to when the product is consumed, whether it's consumed on the go, whether it's consumed at home, is it part of the lunchbox for the kids? So that gives us a lot of insights about where the product is consumed in the journey. At the same time, in terms of preferences, we conduct a lot of ad hoc studies. We conduct usage and attitude studies. What resonates with the brand? What kind of behaviors do the consumers follow with the brand? Is the brand relevant in their consumption journey? Is the brand playing any role in their friendships? Is the brand playing its role in their connections with others? Is the brand really playing a role in sharing? What is the brand actually standing for the consumer? What consumer dialogues or what consumer conversations is the brand part of? We also conduct a lot of social listening through the social media. So that gives us a lot of insight about the brand itself and its relevance with the consumer or with the consumption. That really then determines as to what is the brand looking for in its next phase. You mentioned a very nice piece of communication, which is Fresh Connection, the one that the children are interviewing the adults.
Yeah.
And some of the simple things which a lot of times we take for granted is talking to each other. We are growing in an age and time when we don't actually talk to each other. A lot of communication happens passively. Yeah. But then whenever we are reminded that simple connection of talking to each other actually brings our child back to us, our childhood time back to us. So, and what simple way to relay that message or to communicate that message is by the children teaching us how to do that.
That's they're brilliant.
So this simple connection is something which we have forgotten, and the brand Mentos actually plays a very good role in that, because the brand evolved as a sharing brand. Its iconic stick format with multiple candies inside is great for sharing. It's great for carrying in your pocket. So that brand itself became part of that conversation and was loved. I think I remember this communication was launched in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And in its first couple of hours of its launch in the digital world, it gathered, if I'm not mistaken, more than 200 million views. So I think that's how viral it went. So yeah, I think simple things which again the consumers are enjoying. They're savoring in that moment, and hence the brand plays a big role in that.
So, what's your model of research? Do you have in-house people doing it for you, or usually you employ external agencies who do consumer research for you? And also, whether those agencies are also the same agencies then convert into your advertising agency also, or are these parts separate?
In most cases, I would say they are two separate agencies. Usually, the inciting work is done by specialized agencies themselves. And then the communication is done by more creative agencies or specialized creative agencies. Sometimes the media agency and the creative agencies are similar or common or are part of the same group. But mostly the research is done by independent agencies. We have also across most markets our own in-house people who specialize in consumer research or inciting process. But then in most cases, we do use third-party agencies specialized in conducting these researches.
And for your region, are you looking at the people offering these services within this region, or sometimes you commission it to outside people also?
In most cases, I think these are all global agencies who have also their footprint around the world. So yes, we use local agencies, meaning local offices of international agencies, like the Nielsen's and the Kantars of the world.
Okay.
But mostly, yes, it's more relevant to use a local inciting agency than an outside one.
So what are some of the consumers' insights on packaging, Afnan? Do you change it very often, or you try to stay with the same font, format, or how does packaging work for maybe your most sellable products?
Listen, packaging plays I would say, the most important role in any brand's life. Yeah, it is the first point of contact with the consumer. It is the most sustainable medium for communication for the brand. It's also a medium which allows us to sell that product in multiple channels in different places. Packaging is also a mode which determines the shelf life of the product, in transportability of the product. And at the same time, it's also a means for what the consumers are looking for in the packaging. So to answer your question, some of the packaging formats which are very, very iconic, like I mentioned, this stick format for Mentos candies. It's it's a kind of packaging which goes back 60 years, and it stayed that way, and it still does exist in that way. But then at the same time, now more recently, we're also looking at very much a sustainability subject, right? So some of the packaging material of that iconic brand has changed dramatically. We are now using a fully decomposable materials. We are using multi-layer, multi-product materials. We're making it more recyclable. We're making it more friendly for consumers to know about the product. There is more and more information about portion sizing. There's more and more information about responsible consumption. So yes, packaging plays a very important role, but at the same time, it has to evolve in its own journey with what the consumers are looking for. So it's again goes back to the consumer. It all starts and ends with the consumer.
So, Afnan, how price sensitive are your consumers in terms of the confectionery market? Usually you see these products lined up towards the cash aisles of most of the stores and are picked up as an impulsive product. How do you feel if you've ever tried to play around with the price? What kind of response do you get?
Listen, it's an impulse product, as you mentioned itself, right? I don't think there's only one occasion where candy or confectionery becomes part of the shopping list, and that's the birthday parties. Other than that, it never is part of a shopping list. So it's always an impulse product. If you see it, you feel like it, you buy it. Yeah. Sometimes the consumers remember to buy something, when they're traveling. But again, it's never part of a shopping list. It's mostly an impulse purchase, and hence the reason why it's always near the cash counters. Price sensitivity is one of the major considerations. And that's why I told you earlier that in China, India, Pakistan, and most of the other developing markets, it's usually a single purchase, which is a main determinant of a price point. And usually it's determined by a coinage. In Pakistan, for example, a 1 rupee product would be, the most prevalent product in a traditional trade setup. Similarly, in China, it's the same thing. In India, it's the same thing. In some of the Latin American markets, it's the same thing. So it's really driven by a price point. And we have to, again, look at that consumer behavior and see what are the consumers looking for when they're making a decision to buy our product. And hence the price point becomes one of the major factors as to how we deliver that product. What size would that be? Would that be satisfying for the consumer in that size for that price point? And all these factors then become very important as to how we market that product.
In all of the countries that we've talked about, and I'm thinking about Pakistan right now, and you're right, products with a very small price ticket sells more frequently and sells often. In any of these countries, has a local product given you a tough time ever?
Listen, most of these markets, the market leaders tend to be local brands. For example, in Pakistan, Hilal is by far the market leader. And although we don't have our own corporate setup in Pakistan, but there's a lot of gray import into the Pakistan market, and you can find Mentos or Chupa Chups in almost every retail outlet you go to. But that's more of a disorganized market as opposed to a more corporately organized market. But again, in Pakistan, if we ever decide to be part of that market, we would be competing with Hilal. Similarly, in China, the market leader is Shifuji, which is a local brand. So yeah, in most of these markets, there are local brands which are large. In India as well, we compete, although we are the market leaders, but we compete mostly with the local brands, with the local products. In Indonesia, I remember when I was based there, the largest confectionery player was Indo Foods, which is again a very local company. So yeah, in some markets, we are the market leaders. In some markets, there are some larger international players which are market leaders. But in some markets, it's local brands which are more prevalent, more entrenched, and bigger than us.
Does the retailer play any role in pushing your product to the consumer?
Absolutely. That's the biggest medium we have. Because we do not have a direct to consumer access as yet, although now with online purchasing, it's becoming more and more relevant, more and more important. But at the same time, still the brick and mortar, the retail channel is by far the largest means for us to get our products to the consumer. So absolutely, retailers play a very important part in how we present our products to the consumers.
So let's transition into the present COVID-19 prevalent market and see how your behaviors of confectionery. We talked about how just as countries are going into lockdown, what kind of sales structures do you saw, and what are you looking for in the future? So has this affected sales of confectionery and gum?
Absolutely. I think like any other product, other than toilet paper, of course, we have an impact of this COVID-19. As earlier part of our conversation, we are very much a impulse-driven product. right? So if the consumer is not visiting the stores, or not visiting the shops, we don't stand a chance of being sold. And even when the consumers are there, if they're going there less frequently and are going there only very quickly to buy bare essentials, then again we get impacted quite a lot because of being an impulse product. Yeah. So needless to say, yes, we do have a very large impact of these times, and hence we are looking at how do we stay relevant with the consumer's journey. What kind of products are they looking for? At the same time, our communication has to be adaptive to that. Some of the recent communications we have done around the product is basically chewing gum and freshness, because that still remains very relevant, particularly when people are wearing the mask for a long period of time. And the chewing gum gives a lot of muscular stimulation as well, and as well as staying fresh. So yeah, some of the communication has to change as well. So again, it starts and ends with the consumers. What are the consumers doing? How the brand is relevant with the consumer's need, and how do we stay relevant with our brands and products with those changing needs? And hence, yes, all the behaviors become more and more important for how we go forward.
With curtailed advertising and marketing budgets, how do you plan to communicate with the consumers during this time?
Listen, one of the fabulous things that we are experiencing and enjoying these days is this wonderful gift of technology. You know, you're interviewing me without any limitation of borders and time zones and all that stuff, and you'll be relaying this interview in a very different time zone, in a very different environment.
True.
Yeah, so that's the magic of technology that transports us into a very different world. So yeah, how we stay relevant is primarily through this technology as well. So we become, or we stay relevant with our consumers with using these technologies as well. One of the things I can tell you that retail sales throughout the world in the last 4 weeks are down more than 50-60%. And in certain markets, for example, our travel retail, which is primarily these duty-free shops and all that stuff, which is a very big medium for our sales, has gone to zero because there are no travelers around the world, right? However, if we look at our online sales, they're 500% growth over the same period of last year. So, you know, the consumers are also finding different ways of consuming those products. One of the things which becomes very, very relevant in these days is kids being at home, and they need to be entertained and they need to be indulged. So we're selling a lot of our products, but in a different environment through online sales in different package formats. So yeah, these are all the things that we have to constantly adapt to.
Some of the articles that Afnan you shared with me, I shared with my class also, and we were looking at how post-COVID some of the habits of the consumer will be changed permanently, or maybe for the medium term. Do you think that's going to happen with overall consumption habits, not specifically about confectionery or gum, but generally, do you think that's going to happen?
I think it's inevitable. This current scenario or the current crises are not going to be over in the short term. Mm-hmm. You know, the consumers will have to adapt to a new normal. We as manufacturers and marketers of product will have to adapt to a new normal. I can very fearlessly forecast or predict that you will be going around outside of these four walls very, very soon as well, probably. But you will be changing your behavior forever. You'll be very cautious about how you breathe. You'll be very cautious about not getting infected until a vaccine or a viable vaccine is available to you. So I don't know how long are you looking at. You're looking at a year, half a year, 18 months, 2 years, who knows? Right now, it's very, very uncertain, right? So everybody will have to get used to a new normal. So And similarly for us, we will also have to think of a scenario where when the consumers go out and about, free from or liberated from the lockdowns, how will they behave? What behaviors will they demonstrate? Would our products or brands still be relevant for them or not? Do we have to innovate our product portfolio very, very quickly in a short period of time in order to deliver against those needs? We know for sure that in a very short term, consumers will be consuming products which boost their immunities. So we also have to look at our portfolio which are delivering against those needs. As I told you before, we have some of our products in our Italian market by a brand name called Benegum, which is very famous for its multivitamin gummies. Okay. Are those products going to be more relevant across the world? Probably yes. So we'll have to adapt to all these changes and different behaviors and trends as we go along in the next phase of next maybe short to medium term or maybe even longer term.
Okay, Afnan, we can move on to the last part of our discussion, which I think will be very, very useful for my graduating class. I've often talked to them about you, your career journey, and how proud I am for your being a Pakistani and for all the companies that you've been representing Pakistan at. I think one of the challenges that most of them feel even pre this COVID period is that they, as they're graduating, they're looking for big names on their resumes. And this is one of the questions that many of these students ask me, whether they should go for these big companies. And I think that that just came up to me because you told us about how you changed the way you were looking at employment opportunities post your consultancy period. So, or the other choices that they have are smaller companies based on apps, smaller entrepreneurial enterprises. So as a person who's just starting on this journey, what are some of the things they should be looking at?
I think one of the first questions every single graduating student should really answer for themselves is, what do they actually want to do? Yeah, how do they want to shape their post education life? Are they more adventurous? Do they like traveling? Do they like to explore different parts of the world with different industries? Then they can, choose a certain path in a career which leads more towards those explorations. Those could be more like, jobs with the McKinseys and the Bains of the world. At the same time, if they are more entrepreneurial, if they have fantastic ideas in their minds, then maybe exploring this online phenomena could be a great thing to do. They could be looking at a startup, and that would really take them into a very different path in their life. Similarly, some people may be very deep rooted to where they are. They would like to be close to their family. They would like to be very much in their maternal homes. Then they would be looking at a very different environment as to what are the available opportunities around them. So really, that's the first question that anyone needs to answer for themselves as to what do they want to do in the longer term. Yeah. One thing which I don't think anyone can escape from is a 100% commitment to whatever they want to do. The first 10 years of your life are all about hard work. The definition of hard work may have changed, since 1993 when I started, to 2020 and 21 and beyond. Maybe a smart work is now harder work. But at the same time, there is no escape from that. I don't think that anyone can escape putting into that equity of first 10 years if they really want to enjoy life afterwards.
That's a very realistic kind of advice to give these people. So, Afnan, do you think you were during the first 10 years of your life, did you know what you wanted, or is it really learning in the process?
You want an honest answer?
I want an honest answer.
Listen, my first 10 years were very much experiment. I don't think I'd be lying if I say that I knew what I want to do and how I want to do it. One thing is for sure, that I was never shy of taking risks, of being more open to new ideas and new frontiers. And I think that's basically what shaped my journey. So that more exploratory mindset and my, I don't know, genetic makeup actually led me to that path. A lot of people think very, very hard when they have to change cities. I don't think I even took a minute to change continents. So I think that basically my own intrinsic appetite, which actually led me to this journey. And that's how it shaped my career. One thing for sure, I was always driven by marketing. I was always driven by brands. And that kept me in the food and beverage industry all along. So that's the only thing I know.
And I know you don't feel like boasting about yourself, but I would really like to know what are some of your qualities that your employers have thought were very useful for them?
I would say inquisitive mind to
Mm-hmm.
begin with. Um, I don't settle with what's the first thing that comes to your mind. So I have a very inquisitive mind. I ask a lot of what if questions.
Mm-hmm.
I turn almost every single exclamation into a question mark. So if someone says, what a wonderful month or what a wonderful quarter, I always change that explanation into, was that really a wonderful quarter? Right. And then that leads to a lot of other questions. So I think that's one thing which has always kept me more inquisitive. The other thing, which again, I would like to think that's something my employers really appreciate or look for in me, is building great teams. I think that's one thing which I take a lot of pride in. Whatever I've done, wherever I've done it in 5 different continents. And I've built fantastic teams. And one of my mantras is always look for brighter and smarter people than you. Yeah. If I ever feel that I'm the smartest person in the room, I leave very, very quickly, because then I know that's the worst room to be in.
That's not going to happen very often. Also, so what are some of your softer skills as a human being for building up these teams? Because I know
I think
for smarter people doesn't work, but to retain them, you have to have some softer skills. So what are those?
I think one of the most important elements is to genuinely care for people. You know, when you really care for them, they gravitate towards you. You know, and that's one factor or behavior I would really like to emphasize, particularly for your class, that from the very beginning, be very conscious of who you're working with, who you're working around, who you're working for, or who's working for you, and really genuinely be interested in what they want. Yeah. A lot of times you retain the best talent by just not giving them a single free moment, because they're so driven, they're so passionate, that the moment they sit idle, they lose their value. So, you know, a lot of times you really have to understand what really drives people, what really tickles their imagination. How can you get the best out of them? One of the biggest cliche you have ever heard in human resource is people are the best assets. Yeah. Why? I don't think it's a cliche. It's very, very well thought out phrase. Whenever you talk about assets, you're always talking about investment. Yeah. Some of your physical assets, like your machines, your manufacturing environment, you invest a lot of money in them, and you look at return on investment. Yeah.
Yeah.
In those assets. The funny thing is that most of your physical assets only have a defined capacity. If you invest in a machine that produces X million pieces an hour, that's the most it will ever do. Yeah. But when you invest in people, there's absolutely no limit to their capacity.
Yeah.
You can push them and you can drive them and you can take them to places where, there is no end. And that is one of the reasons why people are your best assets. Yeah. And how do you invest in those assets is extremely important, because, if you teach a monkey to play piano, I don't think that's a very, wise investment, right? But what are they really driven by is where you should invest in them. Yeah. And a lot of times you invest in people just by creating a very social environment. So sometimes, taking your team out for lunch becomes the biggest investment you'd make in building the teams. So that's the most important thing in really knowing what people are made up of, and how can you keep them motivated? How can you push them beyond their own boundaries?
I keep telling these students how important a subject psychology will become in the coming times, about human beings and about human behavior across all disciplines. Let's step on the other side, Afnan. If you were hiring, and one challenge that these students have nowadays is how to develop a good document that represents them. Because usually an employer gives them a few seconds before they move on to the next CV. And also, then we can move on to the connected question of what are some of the skills these young people should acquire for the world of the future. So we can start with the CV first, or a document.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Whether you call it CV, resume, whatever you call that document, that's the first insight into you, right? So I think the most important thing in that document is how creatively you're putting it forward. Yeah. We are always a victim of templates. Yeah. A lot of times we look at templates and we get fascinated by them.
Yeah.
I will tell you, the best resume I've ever received was a golden plastic card, which was actually a USB. And that resume was basically, I had to plug it in to see what it was. But it came to me in a credit card sized golden card. You know, I still remember that resume. I saw that resume probably 10, 11 years ago, and I still remember that. So that really, your creativity of how you present yourself is the most important thing. You see very, very, beautiful resumes. One of a very good resume I've seen lately was just a QR code. Yeah. And hence it really depends on how you're presenting yourself that distinguishes you from the rest of the crowd. That's the most important thing. Sometimes people write pages over pages over pages of those resumes. I never remember any resume I may have read which was longer than 2 pages. I've never read it because I just don't have the patience to do it. Yeah. So it's a very famous phrase from Winston Churchill in one of his books, where he says, if I had more time, I would have written you a smaller letter, right? So that's the most important thing, is how do you condense your thoughts and express yourself in the least possible words. So I think from a document point of view, creativity and preciseness is probably one of the best qualities you can express yourself with. Yeah.
What about skill set for the future of time?
Yes. I think one of the skill set which will differentiate a candidate from all others would be the analytical capability. I think that's probably going to be one of the most sought after skills you can ever imagine. Um, Analysis, whether it's statistical analysis, behavior analysis, turning data into information, capability of handling big data. This is going to be the most important skill in the coming 20 years. One of the things which will really drive the employment market, forget about employment market, I think human market, would be how would you differentiate yourself from the machines and the robots? You're talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, robotics, artificial intelligence. That is what people will be competing with, right? So one really has to think about how do you make the machine work for you versus the other way around. You know? And those will be the skills which would be the most sought after skills in the next times to come.
Thank you very much, Afnan. This was a really, really interesting interview for me myself, and I'm sure my students are going to enjoy it also. I was just wishing that some of them, or at least one of them, ever gets to work with you, because I can imagine what a huge take home that would be. We're all very proud of you as a Pakistani, and me, myself, personally as family. Thank you so much for my time. Some of my students might be contacting you post this interview. To connect on different aspects that we have discussed. Hoping to see you on campus again soon and taking our discussion from here. Thank you so much, Afnan.
Thank you, Sama. You were very generous. But what I would really like would be a feedback as to, if anything that came out of this interview was really helpful for them in their journeys. Or even for their class or consumer behavior that they're looking for. Would be very interesting for me to get some feedback.
I'm just thinking that the very fact that we've recorded this makes this conversation more live for my other sessions also. Had you just come in one session, that would have been for that class only. But for now, it's becoming resource to my course pack. So you'll be getting a lot of feedback, Afnan. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.